Welcome guys, gals and non-binary pals to this week's episode of Buffy Boys, your weekly review of Buffy the Vampire Slayer from a queer, literary and feminist perspective. My name is Joe, I'm one of your hosts, and with me as always is your other green-thumbed host.
Brian, hi. I would disagree with that, but thank you.
We're gardening boys now.
We do garden now, yeah.
We've been talking about spider plants and, repotting things, propagating.
Though I would say, I feel like I'm doing a bad job of it so far. I did have someone recently see one of my plants and go, wow, I've never seen that before. Because basically we have some orchids, and what I've done for the last 5 years with them is water them and literally nothing else. So they have just roots going everywhere. And they consistently die and stuff.
Do you feel you're someone who, if you're not good at something straight away, you're tell it this? In terms of gardening, I'm talking keeping it light. Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. You want to concrete down the whole back garden now.
Yeah, exactly. So, and also it's just been a heat wave in Ireland, a literal heat wave. It's a technical heat wave in Ireland. So we had to...
Yeah, Canada or Australia or wherever.
Yeah. So we had to keep all the plants in the back garden watered and stuff, and there was no hosepipe ban or anything like that, so we're allowed to that. But and just trying to figure out how to, keep plants alive, how to garden, stuff like that, which we know nothing about. So fingers crossed. I've
been in a lot of meetings where people are wilting, on Zoom, but ink string t-shirts, being so we're here to talk about Buffy the Vampire Slayer season 6 episode 21, 2 to go.
We are indeed. Would you like Buffy on summary there, Joel?
Yeah, kick us off there, Brian.
All right, so this episode was written... I'll give you your Buffy on summary and then I'll go into the rest. It's first aired on May 21st, 2002. Buffy and Anya rescued Andrew and Jonathan from jail before Willow can kill them as Warren's accomplices. Willow absorbs Rack's magic and threatens Dawn. Willow teleports Buffy and Dawn to the magic shop where Anya temporarily prevents her using magic against others. Instead, Willow makes herself strong and beats Buffy and Anya while the others flee. She is felled by a magic bolt from Giles. Spike is tested with pain and combat. So the reason I did that first is that there's actually a bunch to talk about the director of this episode. So it was written by Doug Petrie, who last wrote As You Were, and it was directed by Bill L. Norton. So this is the only episode that Bill L. Norton directs. He's listed as various names over his career. I think Will at some points, without the L at different points. He's a film director mostly. He's best known for a movie called Cisco Pike, which is a movie with Chris Christopherson, who's a musician. He was in the Highwaymen, which is a musical supergroup. And Gene Hackman's also in it. I believe I didn't take notes on what the plot was, but I think it's about a police who gets blackmailed into doing drug dealing by Gene Hackman. But essentially, it was not received well at the time, but it's now considered a bit of a cult classic. He directed 6 episodes of Angel, 2 episodes of Hercules, and 2 episodes of the Twilight Zone in the 80s. So that was all interesting. I was like, oh, okay, cool. There was a short note on his Wikipedia page about how his father was notable, and I clicked into his father. His father was William W. Norton, who was a screenwriter from Utah, who's notable for collaborating with Burt Reynolds. But more importantly, he was convicted of gun running in France for the IRA.
So a local connection then.
Yeah, for the ILNA/IRA. He had they list how many guns he was caught with. It was a lot, but he's bringing them from the US basically. And it's because he had lived in Northern Ireland and he kind of saw some of the injustices in terms of Irish Republicans essentially, or being badly treated by the PSNI and stuff like this.
Can I mention, you mentioned Chris Christopherson there. It was tickling something in my brain. He plays Whistler, who is the mentor character in the Blade trilogy, so the vampire horizontal connection there.
Yeah, he doesn't do a lot of acting. He's mostly a musician. Anyway, but this guy, the father, he moved to Nicaragua and he shot and killed a home invader while there, and then he spent a year in Cuba and hated it and was smuggled into the US from Mexico by his wife, where apparently he spent a long time just being terrified the FBI were going to turn up at various points, and at some point before he died was told by his wife, by a lawyer, listen, the FBI don't care, they're not going to come after you, and kind of was fine, and then just died in 2010.
Wow, a storied career, and here we are at the jewel in the crown.
So yeah, so for the Buffy Bronze banter,
Boys,
which is the thing that we were about to do, we said we'd kind of do a bit of a whistle stop tour, just kind of catch up with a couple of different things we'd mentioned before, / what we've been watching. So yeah. Do you want to take us up there, Joe?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the substantial things we watched this week was Fear Street 1978, I want to say.
78, yeah.
78.
Which we definitely, when we talked about Fear Street 1994, 92?
Yeah, 94, yeah.
We said that we would watch the next one next weekend, and we just didn't because I think we just got busy or whatever. So we only watched it a couple of days ago.
Yeah, but I continue to recommend it. There's a third one which we'll come to shortly, 1666, which kind of concludes the trilogy. But this, if you remember from the kind of previous discussion, it's based on inspired by a series by R.L. Stine of Goosebumps fame, his slightly less known series Fear Street, which is aimed at an older kind of teen audience, and it's a great reinvigoration, re-examination of kind of horror slasher killer tropes of the 70s, 80s and 90s. This one particularly being essentially a Friday the 13th film, Camp Crystal Lake kind of vibe. And while it has connections to the kind of the ongoing arc of what's happening in the three films, and I think it's a really interesting, like, it's not a disconnected trilogy, but it's not a single story in a way that is kind of interesting. But it was just a good slasher film, probably not as compelling, certainly for millennial watchers, as the first one, but just like I found it a good romp.
Yeah, it was good all around, and it was like good visually, and I felt like it lacked a little bit of gore personally, but it was good all romp. It felt like authentically 70s style at times. The story overall, I think, was it was just less compelling than the first one, but it was all interesting. There was a really lovely trick where at the very beginning of the movie they had.
Are you going to spoil it?
The very beginning of the movie they had the Man Who Sold the World. Actually, I might get this mixed up in terms of which one was which, but they had the Man Who Sold the World, the David Bowie song, covered by Nirvana, because it was kind of like
transitioning from the 90s
to the 70s, which is like, it's from maybe my favorite Nirvana album, which is MTV Unplugged, because I don't know, I just find it very formative. I listened to it constantly when I was younger, but like there's no wrong, there are like 3 or 4 different Nirvana albums, with including live albums, that you could say is like the best legitimately. Anyway, so then at the end of the movie they do the David Bowie version of it, which is a really nice like two-hander, and actually the music throughout was great.
Yeah, the music was good, and I think it was a very simple story, but like intentionally so, and also because I think the horror of that period was a little simpler as narratively. Do you know what I mean?
100%. If you watch like Friday the 13th now, it's just like it's mostly nothing. It's mostly just like, you know, very notable for the kill cam essentially. The music. That's
whenever the killer is watching, it's always.
Is that Halloween or Friday the 13th?
There's some of it in Friday the 13th, absolutely, as well.
I think that Halloween actually stands up far. Well, so
this is our whistle stop tour.
Friday the 13th isn't a great movie. Ultimately, it's interesting, it's fascinating, it's weird, but it's not great. Halloween is a genuinely brilliant movie, and it has stood the test of time so well. Anyway. Interesting. We'll return to this when we get to the 1666. Is that what it was?
Yeah. Actually, I'd say 2 things would very briefly say that speak to this film. One is it's quite similar to The Final Girl. Is that what that film was called? Which is called a lesser known kind of metatextual horror film, which had kind of like, it was light in some ways, but had a heart to it, which we're big fans of. Final Girl, and also probably a deeper cut, like a novella, if you would call it, by Joey Camo, Bible Camp Bloodbath, which the original version is no longer in print, in which we have a copy of, and an expanded and revised version I think is still available now, but which is essentially a very similar premise. It's kind of like no one gets out of this alive, you know, but has a similar heart to it. Yeah,
I'd agree with that. Both like self-aware, like looks at, you know, camp slasher movies.
Yeah,
and I don't mean camp as in Susan Sontag. I mean, camp as in like a sleepaway camp.
Yeah. Oh, actually, yeah, I didn't catch that. Yeah. What else have we been watching kind of more briefly? So, Ted Lasso, which we've mentioned before, one of our many on the crying list. I think.
So we mentioned that at Christmas because we when the year end lists came out for TV shows for 2020, this was on a lot of them, and we were like, oh, we hadn't really paid any attention to this. And it was a hard sell to you because I was like, okay, Joel, this is based on an advertisement series, and you're like, I'm not watching that.
It's literally
we are watching
based on
too many things, Brian. And
ad.
then we like devoured the entire series in space of like probably like 3 days. Absolutely loved it. Cried many times while watching it. It has a heart of gold as a TV show.
Yeah.
Jason Sudeikis is the main character, like incredibly compelling. And I can't remember his name now, but the guy who's the kind of the retiring footballer who he was recently nominated for an Emmy.
Yeah.
And apparently, like you were saying, is just like has a reputation for being just the nicest guy.
Yeah. And if we haven't mentioned before, a pitch for the arguably the villain of the first season is played by Anthony Stewart Head.
Sure is.
And does a great job, as you might expect.
So season 2 has just started airing. I think the first episode came out last Friday. And hopefully it'll be coming out weekly.
And very, very briefly, the premise is that as a marketing stunt / prank.
A tank. Well, she's trying. So the owner of the football club has inherited it from her husband, who she doesn't like anymore. So she's trying to tank the football club
by recruiting an American football coach to coach an English football team.
An English soccer team, if you get me.
Yeah. What else?
We watched The White Lotus, the first 2 episodes. The third episode only came out the day before yesterday, so we haven't watched it yet. It is a new 6-episode miniseries from HBO, directed and written by Mike White of School of Rock School of Rock fame. He's Ned Schneebly in School of Rock,
and the writer, right?
And the writer of School of Rock for sure, which was directed by what's his name, Richard. One of my favorite directors, so I should really know this.
Linklater.
Yeah, Richard Linklater.
Yeah.
But more importantly for me, Mike White created, wrote, and starred in Enlightenment or Enlightened. Sorry, I always get this mixed up. It's Enlightened with Laura Dern from the early noughties or maybe late 2000s, but which is one of my favorite TV shows of all time. Absolutely fucking love it, and it was just immaculate and beautiful. But this is like his new TV show. It is about a resort in Hawaii, some people staying there, and the staff there as well. And so far, it's been great.
Yeah, it's weird. It's a limited series, I believe. And
just
it's
6 episodes. Yeah.
Basically, what's implied is very early on in the first episode that someone dies during the week, and it's like, how do they get to that point from this ultra rich kind of And
it's quite funny. Steve Zahn is one of the main characters or maybe Zane, I'm not sure, but I love Steve Zahn, and you just don't know him.
We're trying to figure out why do I know him? Oh, he played Phoebe Buffay's original gay Ice Capade's husband on Friends. That's where I recognise him from. Also in it is Jason Lee, no, is that right? Jennifer Coolidge, Jennifer Coolidge, and an actor whose name escapes me, but who played Dong on Looking, and who was a gorgeous man, and gay in real life.
Dom, and I have no idea what his name is. He's Australian though.
Yeah, but he's very funny in it. So we're enjoying that so far.
Yeah, I would recommend. And finally, you've just finished Ratchet and Clank, the game. Ripped apart. How'd you find it?
We're going to pick, but it's people may remember Ratchet and Clank from their childhood video game PlayStation playing. But it's very, very, very briefly, I devoured it. It was a tremendous amount of fun. It was very nostalgic, but I was jealous of children being able to play games like this nowadays, potentially, because it just pushed the ability and the technical ability, the visual ability, the narrative ability of the PlayStation 5 to its max. Really utilised everything tactilely, felt fantastic.
The guns are so good in it because it really takes advantage of the resistance that the DualShock, the trigger buttons can do. So it feels like every thing you click you do is doing damage, it's really cool.
It had a kind of interesting story. It really felt like, you watch, I think we mentioned before the film Mitchell versus the Machines, but just that feeling of watching a really good film that's ostensibly aimed at kids and remembering how good that feels when it's done well, and when it's done in a modern way that's inclusive and has a not condescending storyline and all that. By finishing this game, I was like, I feel like I played through a really good children's film and very unabashedly enjoyed it. And it doesn't talk down to its audience.
It really doesn't.
So speaking of things that don't talk down to its audience, Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yeah. How'd you find this episode, Joel?
I enjoyed watching this episode, which was a bad episode of Buffy.
Agreed. Yeah,
is how I put it. I think
I'm not even sure if I enjoyed it a huge amount, in the sense that there's definitely a sense throughout that it was just like rambling, like, you know, we have to hit this point, we have to hit this point, we have to go here, we have to do this. It was
very. I enjoy. You know me, Ryan. I will always enjoy watching a bit of a car crash and dissecting it. You know, but it was very paint by numbers. It was very like, we have this incredibly strong premise, which I don't think it betrays, but we have this incredibly solid premise, which is Willow has gone off script, essentially, as both as a in-universe, but also kind of in terms of the arc. But it puts Buffy is often at its most unbalanced when it's in positions that the town isn't built for, and the story isn't built for. So here they're essentially chasing her around the town, and she's chasing the 2-0 around the town, but the show is built very much on getting the static locations and having set pieces there, and not this chase thing. And
we know this because when they did this in the last season
with Glory,
not so much they were running away from Glory, but with the chase sequence with the Knights Templar, with the Knights, whatever it was,
Knights Byzantium, I want to say,
Byzantium, it was unsuccessful. It wasn't very good.
It was very similar vibes to that. And also they can't kill Willow, and they can't really bring a lot of the techniques they usually use to either deal with or, importantly, talk about enemies. So it's uncomfortable in some ways. I think is interesting, but like, you could not have more than a couple of episodes of this in a show. Do you know what I mean? Like, it just doesn't really.
I was thinking, like, you know, could you just fully remove this episode, like, with a couple of very small script changes to the last episode and the next one, and like, probably not. You do need like some like bridging thing to get to the end game, and especially with that, like, what I'll say about the episode is the absolute shining star of the episode is Giles coming in at the end of the episode, and I kind of felt like I missed Giles. You know, I got that moment at the end, but also and that line, you know, I'd like to test that theory, whatever it is. So good, so well delivered, so perfect, so ideal. And yet then it's kind of like, my memory of it is also betrayed by the fact that in the next episode he doesn't really do anything. He doesn't manage to like keep Willow down.
Well, see, this is a common. I had this misconception as well, and it's a common thing that happens. And maybe it's a bit of a Deus Ex Machina, but it is. He does say in the next episode that his intention was for her to take his power because it opened up her humanity again. He's poisoned the well, essentially.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So interesting, but anyway. So what I'd say about this episode is, I think there's a better episode to be written here. What I am going to suggest is that what you do in this episode is that you take a denouement. You know, you have Willow out there, you have the gang furiously debate what they have to do because they don't have a plan here. It feels like they're scrambling. It feels like they're going point to point, and it takes away from any sense of momentum, any sense of anything, to just like have this unplanned mess happening. So if you instead have the gang at the end of the episode lose Willow, have her do her machinations, them having no way to find her, maybe she's found a way to like hide herself from Anya, and then trying to batten down the hatches and prepare for her potential attack on the duo. Maybe Anya gets to hide them, and Willow's going around amassing powers, doing carnage and stuff, and then trying to say, like, you know, what do we do if Willow is the person who we need to put down, or the person who we need to like attack or whatever. And instead you kind of get an episode full of bad quips, constant moving, constant changing of scenery, which adds nothing. You get too much of Andrew and Jonathan squabbling. You get Buffy not really seeming to experience much pathos at all over the whole thing, and then like a really odd scene with Dawn and Willow, which I found incredibly uncomfortable. So at one point, Willow has gone to find Rack because she wants to steal his powers, and she does kill him and leave him upside down, though the comics, of course, bring him back to life because...
I'm not sure if he was meant to be dead in this episode.
Oh, yeah.
Because he's a human, right? He's a human warlock.
He's not human, no.
Okay.
I don't think he's human. I think he's supposed to be non-human.
I think deliberately ambiguous thing is how I say
but he's definitely killed in the sense that he when Buffy says, "Oh my God, is he dead?" Willow says, "Well, sometimes you have to," or something like that. You know, it's not like it's somewhat ambiguous. No one checks his pulse. No one says I killed him, but like strong implications, and the text is trying to communicate to you that this person is dead. With that, it's just like, so Willow finds him or finds her, and Willow is kind of like being slightly seductive towards Dawn, I want to say, or kind of like
inappropriate. Maybe she's being inappropriate and weird. Yeah, for
sure. And it doesn't really fit in with the portrayal of Willow in the previous episode. I think this whole episode has a real like identity crisis in the sense they're not sure what to do with Dark Willow, because there are a couple of points through the episode where they're kind of suggesting that Willow is essentially now under the influence of magic drugs.
Yeah.
You know, at one point, Willow or Tara says, or Dawn says, "Are you back on the magics?" And Buffy says, like, "I don't even know how much of Willow is in there," and stuff like this.
And Willow says, "I'm not on the magics, I am the magics."
Yes.
Yeah.
Far better writing piece here is that, like, you know, if you stick to your guns and you say, we have a character who has experienced so much trauma that she is broken, that she has lost herself completely, and she is now become a different person to some degree, and but like this stuff around like her being that weird character towards Dawn and stuff, it brings you right back to the Wrecked episodes and stuff like that, and it just doesn't work.
There's a line, I was going to say a line from this directly to the Wrecked episodes, and it's this implication that when she's under the influence of magic / on a high / addicted / whatever, it makes her mean or like, you know, combative in a way that I think is like not.
Whereas the previous episode, when she's in the car with Buffy and Xander, she's weird and angry and furious, but not like, and certainly like callous when she does that to
Warren. I forgot his name.
Yeah, I constantly forget his name. So when she does it to Warren, she's callous and angry and bitter, and for the rest of this, she's just like almost a sense of playfulness rather than like a dark playfulness. They've kind of gotten her confused with Dark Willow, I think, at this point. Sorry, with Vamp Willow at this point, which I think is like bad writing. If they had stuck with their guns and said, listen, this character has lost everything, and we are writing a character in their absolute darkest moment, would have been brilliant.
Yeah, I think some of that collusion with the Vamp Willow character is also the implication that maybe this is inside of her, in the same way that when someone becomes a vampire, it's meant to be a reflection of maybe their darker impulses, but it's always been unclear. It's like, is it actually them in any way, or is it just a demon inhabiting them, etc. So I think it's an unusual episode, and also just like when you think back on Buffy as 7 seasons, you would never think, oh, that period where Anya is like a neutral agent who is a demon but isn't working for them, but isn't fighting them, and is also, for this period, Anya has a lot of magical ability herself. Like at one point, Anya even says that despite Willow's evident power, she says a wish of her magnitude or something can only fly through the air. She can't actually teleport. So the implication is that Willow becomes insubstantial and it takes time to go somewhere. Whereas Anya can actually just zoop there. It's like, so Anya's like quite a powerful person for this couple of episodes. So
then in other ways not, because when Willow actually attacks her, she like immediately just crumples.
Yeah, and I thought it was fascinating when we had that kind of final showdown in the Magic Box. I was saying to you at the time how television used to draw tension from such smaller scale, because it is essentially just the two of them fighting in a shop, not really destroying the place that much, and Anya is 8 feet away behind a curtain for the entire thing. And that is actually that classic moment when you do have in your Game of Thrones, you're invincible or that kind of show, you have someone who is incredibly powerful. There's often something that can hold them at bay for a moment until they can neutralize that weakness. And it's Anya speaking not quite quietly from 8 feet away. It's so television-y. Anyway, but no, I think there are some positives that we can extract from this episode as well. I do think there's definitely some interesting stuff we can extract from this episode. And I think if we follow the through line that this season is really positioning the masculinity, toxic masculinity, misogyny as kind of a not a subtext, but a text of what the threat is. I think I'm glad that they don't just jettison Andrew and Jonathan as characters, insofar as they do allow both of them to have some kind of progression in their character development. Like, not necessarily very far, but Jonathan does actually have some level of, okay, I have been complicit in this, and ultimately goes to the point of saying, I really should face justice for this. But he also understands, no, he develops a strength that the other two didn't think he had, which is probably like a real strength, as opposed to the like the kind of the incel 4chan strength that they have, you know. Whereas Andrew goes the entire opposite direction, and it's just like this mess of betrayal and like sexism and calling people a bitch and like all this kind of stuff, and it has this absolute splurge of just saying, like, I'm not even going to try and quote it, but it's like, none of you have the midi-chlorians to fight the Wookiees the way that Darth Maul did. It's
just embarrassing,
off the wall nerd shit, yeah. But I do think maintaining the idea that showing how they react to it has value, and it's kind of like, okay, it's kind of what they're trying to reflect with Willow in some ways, where it's like, just because something terrible has happened doesn't mean you're absolved of the responsibility to, in successive moments, to continue to act well. And that's essentially what acting, like, morally or ethically is, you know, kind of, you know.
You sound like me.
Yeah, exactly. I do think that much more so looking at season 6 and with this episode in mind, there is an arc here that I didn't necessarily see previously, which is a couple of things. One is this idea, really bookended, of like Buffy trying to understand what is the point of being alive. Essentially, if you don't have a single unifying motive, a single unifying enemy, kind of understanding herself, what her values are and how she puts them into practice. But what I did like about the confrontation scene as well was really foregrounding the idea that Willow has always been just on the edge of being the protagonist. Like, she's the only person in the Scoobies really who could and has at times acted as the de facto either protagonist or leader of the group, and she talks about having been sidekick for so long and then finally getting to like take that position. And I think I definitely buy the idea that Willow is a plausible opponent for Buffy here. Yeah
I think so too. I for sure feel that as well. And I think what's interesting with all this is that, like, while there's some degree to which Willow has like absorbed powers from elsewhere, you kind of get the sense that those are fueling an energy rather than an ability. Yeah. Like, the ability and the know-how and everything, like, it's all in there. It's fascinating. I'd agree with you about all that with Jonathan and Andrew. It's like, you know, the misogyny really does like bear out. It is funny that like Andrew becomes the character that he is in season 7, in the sense that like, he's framed in the way that he is, and Jonathan is like just like sacrificed and doesn't have enough blood.
So really ignore for Jonathan after all that growth, just be like, you're too short, lol.
Yeah, well, Danny Strong does okay with it anyway. One of the problems that one of the things that Mark Field notes about this episode, is that and a major issue with it is that it does have a sudden not course correction, because that's a sudden change of heart when it comes to the morality of the whole situation. So in the last episode, it was very clear, they say it very specifically, that Willow cannot cross this line, which is killing Warren, that killing a human is wrong in the situation, and she cannot do it. She will lose herself. And in this episode at the beginning, while Buffy and Xander are walking away, they're saying, okay, well, like, no, Warren was crap, so maybe it's okay that she killed him.
Yeah,
but she definitely can't. Definitely not Andrew and Jonathan.
Yeah, you're right.
And it was just like, I mean,
do you think that's a writing thing or a character thing?
That's a writing thing. You know, like, I mean, there's the writing response here as Buffy is showing her grappling with that, maybe saying, okay, well, listen, it's happened, and like the absolute horror of having to like incorporate that and like having to change the goalpost for herself. But instead of like a goalpost changing for herself, it feels like it's changed for the narrative. You know, it's like, oh, well, we have to stop her doing this. It's like, yeah, you also need to stop her doing this. Like, I mean, and maybe that could have like led to some interesting conversation around what do we do about a murderous Willow, you know, which would have been really, really interesting and very, very like good. And instead of kind of like, as I was saying, it kind of fills it in with a lot of quips. One of the things that we noticed about the episode is that the visual effects throughout were crap.
The actual, and by visual effects, I think we actually even mean like some of the more practical-esque effects.
Yeah, like not necessarily the special effects. Like the special effects were reasonably minimal. It was mostly just Willow zooping people and some magical barriers, which were all fine.
Yeah.
But when Willow comes into the prison, It was awful.
Yeah, see, I always had a sense of like this is a bit in Truman Show where you weren't meant to go because it's the county or the local jail and it's quite flimsy, and you can see as she starts pulling the wall apart into the cell, you can see the pre-cut bricks where the wall is going to come apart, and also the police station empties of cops. I say of the 15 extras there, it looks like they cast the same man 15 times. Like it is, there's no, it's so generic. But they run out of the building on, I'd say, 4 separate occasions.
Yeah,
like there's four shots of the. It actually I won't be overly specific, but it reminds me of a very humorous video I saw in work context at one point where it just had the person playing entirely straight, but with to the camera. But each time they started talking, they started walking again towards the camera from the back of the room. And it kind of gave kind of like an Alan Partridge kind of quality to it.
It sounds like the Snowman.
Yeah, yes, it did have the Michael Fassbender magnum opus, the Snowman. It had very similar qualities to that. And similar here, it was like we don't know how to do a scene in the county jail, and Anya trying to talk to a policeman to let them out. Like it was all kind of There was an element of ad hocness to it, and then Willow riding the 8-wheel truck and then or 18-wheeler and then trying to steer it and all this kind of stuff.
Did you see what it's a reference to?
No, is it is it that like haunted, not haunted, but like the horror film where it's like an anonymous truck driver? Is that what you mean?
No, okay. It's actually not. Apparently it's a reference to John Carpenter's Vampires.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's specifically a shot from it where like there's someone like on top of the truck controlling the person underneath to drive where they want.
That makes sense.
But that was like genuinely comedic. We were like, what the fuck is happening at this point? Anyway, so I really am convinced that there was a much better episode to be written here, and it just didn't happen, unfortunately. And Grave is the next episode, isn't it? Mm-hmm. As far as I remember, it's much better. Mm-hmm. But still, it kind of feels like, fingers crossed. This episode was shown at the same time. It was shown as a 2-parter with Grave, so I think that's something we need to bear in mind, is that like this wasn't supposed to be like really experienced as a standalone thing, where this whole like with a whole like carrying an episode weight to itself. It was supposed to be just like all set up.
I think something which is
the thing is, like, you know, previous Buffy episodes, which are 2-parters, which do a setup episode and a payoff episode. The setup episodes are often so good, like Surprise Innocence. Yeah. Surprise is incredible. Becoming Part 1 was really, really good. Graduation Day Part 1, excellent, you know. So
yeah, it's just, I think something to bear in mind there as well is, yes, absolutely, Buffy has a great pedigree of setup and payoff in 2-part episodes. But there is also a culture, I think, particularly in this time on television, of kind of 2-hour television events. Yeah. Where the first hour, as you say, is really meant to ramp up. And it's not a
we're coming into the Lost era.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so
literally the Lost TV show era, which kind of was very like event television.
Yeah, so it's a factor here, like the shape of television is changing at the same time. Yeah.
Like where like actually at this point you have to have every episode be like an enjoyable thing, but it doesn't have to be as episodic because so much of it is binge watched and watched in non-traditional formats. Yeah,
actually, bizarrely, sidebar, but I saw an announcement that to speak to that very specifically, the next season of Doctor Who is going to be a single serialized story.
Too.
Essentially,
yeah, it made me interested. I was like, oh, I could watch that, but at the same time, I don't trust Doctor Who anymore to do one good story. Never mind, like, you know, 14 of them, you know.
Yeah.
Because like I noped out of the last season of Doctor Who, and you struggled through it, and you found it crap.
Yeah, and like it's one of 2 series where you know, it's my cross to bear. I will watch everything the Star Trek makes. I will watch everything the Doctor Who makes. But I did see an article that like a lot of the worst rated episodes of the revival of Doctor Who have all been during the last couple of seasons, which is Jodie Whittaker's era. Yeah. But like you wonder, is like that, is there an element of misogyny to it? Because there's definitely clunkers in previous seasons.
Well, you're talking about IMDb ratings, so I would say IMDb is like, I presume, right? Or are you talking about viewership?
I cursorily, no, it was ratings. It was so cursorily.
Oh, sorry, go on.
No, the opposite of that, ratings. I cursorily looked at the article, but I believe it was probably IMDb. Yeah.
Yeah. So IMDb ratings are notoriously misogynistic.
Yeah.
Like the people rating stuff on IMDb still in the year 2021 are almost entirely men who live in their mother's basements.
Do you ever think about how when the American television talks about Nielsen ratings, just very briefly, how that used to work?
Yeah, it was like a group of like a couple of families with a book,
like literally a written journal. They would keep up what they watch and then post it back to the Nielsen Corporation or whatever.
I hope they were paid loads for money for that.
Oh, almost certainly not.
So actually, you know what, Joel, we need to do? We need to sit down and for one of these Buffy bronze banters, both times I've done that. I have a real problem when it comes to language and similar lettered words being interchangeable for me, because my own like bizarre like talking problems is like I have to, if I like try to construct a sentence in advance and try to think through it, it just doesn't work at all. So I have to kind of go into something head first and just be like, oh, I hope this turns out okay.
Kind of like when you're running down a hill and you have to keep running so you don't fall over.
Well, that's a good description of what of the speech impediment that I suspect that I do have, which is cluttering. That is not diagnosed, and I would never suggest that I'm someone who suffers from a speech impediment. And also, if I do have it, it's very light and I handle it reasonably well. But that's a good example, a good description of it. But also, yes, that is how I experience going to conversations and going into sentences. And words with similar letters starting them, I find it really tricky. Anyway.
What's the name of our podcast?
I don't know.
Incidentally?
Boys Buffy. So what I was going to say was next week for the Bronze Banter, if we don't have something significant, let's talk about Matt Baum's videos.
Very
because
good.
we never talked about them. And Matt Baum does... basically, he looks at all of queer representation in sitcoms and TV shows, specifically in his like passion period, which is like the 80s and 90s. And he is, for my money's worth, one of the absolute best content creators around. He does it. He's mostly on YouTube, and I think he has a very long running podcast as well.
Yeah, I listen to it.
Yeah, his YouTube videos are thoughtful, considerate, sad, but also very aware. He had an episode just come out yesterday about a gay man who was one of the lead creators for Sesame Street and the Muppets, and just like it's great, and kind of we definitely should talk about that. I think he's wonderful.
Yeah, I think it ties in the sense that the history of
TV
gay representation on television is kind of the history of like gay people in society and what that means and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So yeah, I think a recommendation there would be good.
Should we move into the Buffy? Wait, no, the
Buffy dusting. Yeah.
The dusting. Yeah. Okay.
The dust
okay. Some Buffy bits for you. I don't really have any, to be honest. As I said, this was jump back to back with your one. And yeah, the vampires reference there as well. I noted in my notes. Additionally, we saw there was a Jurassic Park reference at one point,
which I was going to say,
which Jurassic Park is one of my absolute favorite. I fucking love Jurassic Park. Anyway,
if anyone hasn't seen it, it's a film from 1992.
Go fuck yourself. It's not, from 93. Anyway, so Jurassic Park, where the cup rattles because Willow's on the way and Willow's apparently a T-Rex because why not?
Well, you know what lesbians can't see if you stand perfectly still.
Yeah. We also haven't...
Let's go in the episode promo.
Yeah. We also noted that there's a fight scene between Spike. We didn't talk about it, but Spike is doing his trials at the moment, so he fights a spicy fisting boy.
Flame boy.
The flame boy, a guy with flame fists. I thought the effects are pretty okay, actually.
Yeah.
I thought they were pretty effective.
I wonder... No, there's no way that was practical. Doesn't make any sense.
No, Sorry. It was not practical.
It wasn't. One of the reasons we didn't mention Spike is Spike has a 6 minute scene that they have edited into 3 episodes.
Yes,
that's what's happened here.
Yeah. I think it's bad. Anyway, so and also then my final note will be about Spike in terms of Buffy, Bronze Hunter, Buffy Bits. Anyway, so which is that Spike at one point says, "Here we are now, entertain us," which is a Nirvana reference, and it was one of the most awkward moments of my life. I fucking hated it.
Yeah, that was pretty funny. So it's been a Nirvana reference heavy weekend for you.
And I was listening to Nirvana a bunch last week without any context of any of this, which is really weird. Anyway, Joel, do you have any Buffy bits?
Yeah, I can't emphasize how uncomfortable it is when Andrew does his nerd talky thing. It's really ramped up in these episodes, and it always
He represents
has.
you, Joel, a queer nerd.
It always has the vibe of like the Big Bang Theory, where it's like it's such surface references. And also he made a reference to a Superman versus the Amazing Spider-Man comic, which I haven't researched, but I don't think it's necessarily a real thing, because
The Amazing Spider-Man.
no, Superman versus Spider-Man, because it's DC versus
okay.
Marvel. That's sounded off to me. I loved just again how useless Xander is in this episode. At one point, Buffy's like, "Meet me."
I have an answer for you. It is a comic that was published in 1976, and here you go. Look, there's Superman versus Spider-Man.
Okay, to be fair, I am looking at the cover and I was wrong, but it still sounds stupid.
Yeah.
So we'll redact this.
Superman would destroy Spider-Man.
He would. They literally, it would be a bloodbath. I love when Buffy was like, "Meet me at the county jail," and Xander's like, "What do you mean?" And she turned and just sprinted into the distance. That was high comedy.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that. Also, when Willow goes to Rax, he's obviously like doing some tarot or rune stuff, but it just looks like he has enormous Scrabble tiles that he's organizing, which amused me. And I wouldn't usually kind of go so heavy on the quotes, but there's some real clunkers in this episode.
Go
So
for it, please.
there's Andrew saying, "I like taking orders" in like a really plaintive way. Willow's a junkie. Willow's a junkie. I think it's a Willow that says, "Get off, super bitch" to Buffy.
Yep.
And we'll give this one to Andrew calls Willow that Wicca bitch. Like, just a lot of this kind of stuff. She's chock full of dark juice. And lastly, Anya saying the annoying virgin has a point. Like, it's all very first draft, a little bit, dialogue.
It really is. Okay, and fashion notes. I would just note that the only two things that are really worth noting are Anya's collar, the like white collar. It's awful. Her hair looks nice, and I hate
pilgrimy.
Yeah, it is very pilgrimy. And I hate the trousers she's wearing. They're like a black lace number. It was awful. But I do like Buffy's woolly hats. I just find it compelling whenever Buffy wears woolly hats. I don't know why she does it, and I like it. How about you? What are your Buffy bits? Sorry, your fashion notes.
I think I would say when this will be stealing from tomorrow to pay today, but when Giles arrives, and he's in his like weekend dad outfit, but just brimming with dark power and white magics and all that kind of stuff. White magic being like an actual actual term, not a weird racial term for Giles. And that was good for me.
White dad magic.
Yeah, 100%. And otherwise, I would just say that the police in this episode, they look like they are in a production West Side Story. There's no attempt to make them look like actual police officers. Yeah.
Okay. Death count. Do you have one first, Joe?
Officially, just quote unquote local boy, the Flame Fist, Flip Fistic. Definitely white bodybuilder who was in this distinctly African setting. He had his neck broke by Spike, and I will say ambiguously Rack drained of potent dark juice.
We see the only reason they don't list him on the Buffy Wikipedia page
is because he's alive in the comics.
He's alive in the comics.
Yeah, so okay, I'll give that to you. You killed Rack.
Great. Do you have a rating for me, Joe?
Yeah, I would probably give this maybe like a 7.1. Unnecessary Xander based recaps. Like it's a real come down, I think, from some of the previous episodes, and it is filler. And as someone who is like trying to like give it the benefit of the doubt, there's some interesting stuff there, and definitely some more entertaining. Like, I wasn't bored watching it. I was like, this is gas, you know? But like, not a good episode necessarily. Yeah,
I'm gonna give it 6.0 annoying virgins out of 10. It's like, you're absolutely right. It was a bit entertaining. It had some entertaining aspects to it. I just found tonally it was bizarre, and it was by far the weakest penultimate episode of Buffy so far. I'm going to do a controversial, I think, revision. I think because I don't think I want it in the 7. I think maybe a 6.8. 6.8. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Cordelia Chase, Joel.
Yeah. So over in the Cordelia Chase, we have Benediction, which is kind of the second of really 3 episodes in the end of this season of Angel to deal with. Conger coming back and kind of how that kind of affects and wraps everything up. So I would say that it was.
I have a question for you, Joe? You know the way there was a mid-season break for Angel?
Mm-hmm.
Is this now not airing at the same time as Buffy?
I have no idea. I
presume it's not, because it feels like very like non-contiguous with Buffy.
I think that they've definitely passed the point at which they line up what's happening anyway between the shows. I think this is the point of divergence for the show, is when Connor arrives, they kind of just go off on their own kind of maybe ambiguous.
Connor meeting Buffy, like.
Yeah, well, people often talk about like Connor and Dong in the same breath, because they're both teen characters that were introduced late in the show, but they're just very different, do you know what I mean? And they bring different stuff. So this episode is kind of dealing with a lot of kind of like crunchy stuff around Angel trying to get a handle on parenting Connor and being there for Connor and convincing him to trust him. Connor goes by the name Stephen because that's the name the Hulks gave him, and he's trying to like understand what it was like to be in a hell dimension and all this kind of stuff, but they're also worried that something else has come through the portal, which we realize that the audience is Hulks, who is aged now, and the eventual thing the episode is working towards is that Hulks sets up a situation where Justine, his acolyte, kills him with a screwdriver to make it look like he's been bitten by Angel, and this is setting up an ultimate betrayal essentially, and that Connor will forever turn against Angel because of this. And it was an interesting episode to watch. I thought that some of the stuff between kind of, Cordelia at one point uses her godlike powers to cure Connor of his depression, essentially. Like literally is like cures him of his anger and his angst using soft focus lights. And what I found really, really hard to understand about the episode is we go through some motions of Hulk's talking to Connor, Hulk's talking to Angel about how he used to be motivated by hate, and he's learned that, the vengeance doesn't really drive him anymore, that Connor should be with Angel, and hopefully when Angel looks at Connor, he can understand what he took from Hulk's, and writes a letter to Connor saying, it's important that you be with him, etc. It's really hard to determine what his actual plan was, I think. Mm-hmm. I was like, is his thing the entire way along meant to set both of them up to say that he has grown in some way, or is in some way letting Connor go, but it's really just to open them up for a Game of Thrones moment? Or is Justine falsifying this in some way, or kind of making it more about revenge thing?
Justine seemed surprised that he did this whole with like killing himself and stuff, so
yeah, but
I don't think she's been clued in.
But then why write the
letter?
He's trying to set up. And is he trying to set up a scenario where Connor genuinely believes that Hulks had let him go and was the bigger man, and Angel killed him anyway? Mm-hmm. Like I really felt like that this is the start of a few episodes, and it's happened a couple of times to Angel before. But like if you're in that writer's room, there might be a light bulb moment where you say, "Sorry, we're all agreeing why he's doing this actually right," and everyone might have different ideas. So I think it was. There's some interesting bits to it. I think there's some good fight scenes. There's some good confrontations. I think, and I'll say this now before we go any further with Angel. I think Vincent Kartheiser playing Connor does the best he can at most times with the character that he has, but I don't think he was the right person to cast for the role.
Yeah, so we got a tweet during the week, actually, which we haven't written back to because we've just been super busy, but from Grind, who I think specifically has like quite a lot of interest in Angel, who's one of the super fans, I presume, but tweeting a very interesting article about specifically Vincent Kartheiser, where he was interviewed about the show, and like asked like why he basically is on it, or like what he felt about it, because he had like a very wonderful experience with Mad Men, and his experience with Angel was basically that Joss Whedon had abandoned the project by this point. Mm-hmm. That he never felt like he could actually make anything of the Connor character, and that he very quickly found he was not enjoying it, that it was a repetitive process, and he was happy to leave it by the time he did. Yeah. And he says basically that, like, it does feel like it gets a bit of a breath of fresh air after a couple of seasons, especially when Spike comes back in season 5, but that he felt like it was a negative experience for him as an actor, and that Connor was essentially brought in to inject some focus into the show or some new energy, and it doesn't really work ultimately, and that
Spike, I think, to be fair, well, season 5 is such a season 5 of a TV show. It's like, let's do one more season and then finish. Spike does inject a lot of energy because he's a great character.
100%.
But I think for me,
he wasn't a fan of Buffy to start with, I believe. So that's kind of like,
I think Vincent Kartheiser wasn't the right actor for this role, and I think that's partly what we get here. But I think there's some good ideas in there and there's some good stuff. It's just not its strongest point, which is kind of a shame because it's what it is building to, essentially, is this idea of the parenthood and all that kind of stuff. So really building on that, kind of coming up towards the finale where we have Connor's revenge against final appearance of essentially Cordelia, the actual real person, rather than the replacement Cordelia. Although we still, thankfully, I was thinking we still do have Charisma Carpenter for another season after this, or for the majority, the rest of the season.
Season 4 has Charisma Carpenter throughout, though I think she's in a coma for part of it. Yeah. God. And then in season 5 you have her coming back as actual Cordelia for a very brief moment. Anyway.
I would give this maybe 5.
Oh, really?
5 or 6 feminist gestures, maybe.
I was gonna go for 7, but you know what?
I'll give you 7 to the last couple because I felt they were tighter and it was more kind of like a clearer thing. And this this had good bits, but it was like it's not 6 because it was bad. It's 6 because it wasn't good. Yeah.
No, okay. I'll go for 6 as well. You've persuaded me.
Great. For once in our 10.5-year relationship, so.
I think that's actually the first time we referred to a relationship as a relationship on this podcast. I'm sure there's some people out there who are like keeping track, being like, "Oh, good, confirmed canon." Yeah, confirmed in the
exactly, confirmed in the canon.
Yeah.
They've been we have fans who have been shipping us.
Hilarious.
So thank you very much for joining us this week. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Buffy and this episode of Buffy Boys. If you enjoyed this episode, please let us know. Tell your friends. Tell the 10 to 17 identical police officers in your local precinct. And we will see you next time. We're Brian.
I'm Buffy Boys. And you know what we're going to be doing?
What's that?
We're going to be we're going to be going through a best of the season for next week, for the season finale. And you know what, Joel? You will inevitably ignore one of the questions that I send you. And you will, on the day, be like, you didn't list this.
Inevitably or intentionally.
Worst bit character? I've never heard of her.
I think you're the worst bit character on this podcast. See you next time.
I'm the worst main character in this podcast.
See you next time, Brian.
Bye.